Want to ace the LSAT and get into your dream school? Today we're breaking down the top 10 things you should be doing to prep like a pro. The first thing you should be doing is taking a practice test. Ideally, this should be an old LSAT. I know it sounds weird to be taking a test before you even start studying, but this is going to give you a good gauge on where you are when you're starting your prep. Based on what you studied in undergrad and how much exposure you have to logical reasoning, your initial score is going to vary pretty widely. So it's really helpful to know where you stand right when you're beginning your prep. But don't just go taking the test willy-nilly. You're going to want to simulate the LSAT conditions to the best of your ability. This means blocking off a few hours of your day, finding a quiet, isolated space, and setting a timer for each section. The goal is to treat the practice test as much like the real thing as you can. This is going to give you the best read on your strengths and your weaknesses. So, when you take your practice LSAT, make sure you get enough sleep, you have a good breakfast, and your phone is on Do Not Disturb. If you've been approved for additional time or other accommodations, make sure you factor those in when you're taking your practice test. If you do this right, you'll have a good grasp on what sections you're good at and what sections need a bit of work. And those latter sections are where you're going to spend the bulk of your time studying. Since the LSAT is scored based on the number of questions you get correct across all sections, it's important to get as many correct answers as possible, regardless of what section they come from. Going from the 90th percentile to the 95th percentile in logical reasoning is a lot less impactful than going from the 40th percentile to the 70th percentile in reading comprehension. So you're going to want to spend the bulk of your time on those weaker areas if you want to maximize your score. But if you really want to maximize your LSAT score, I recommend that you check out today's video sponsor, Premier LSAT Prep. The LSAT is a difficult exam, but it's also a learnable one. Premier LSAT Prep helps students learn the test and also maximize their scores through affordable individualized tutoring. Premier's tutors weren't gifted LSAT takers at first, but they learned the strategies necessary to score in the 99th percentile. And now they use those strategies to help students increase their scores by as much as 20 to 30 points. If you're interested and want to learn more, click the link in the description and use code TEX5 for 5% off any of their packages. Now that you have an idea on where you stand, it's time to make an actual study schedule. The details of your schedule will vary from person to person. If you scored a 160 on your first practice LSAT, your schedule is going to look a lot different from somebody who scored in the 140s. But there are a couple of things that everybody should keep in mind when making their schedules. First, know how much time you have until your actual test date. If you have 8 months until your actual LSAT, your schedule is going to look a lot different from if you only had 3 months. Second, make studying for the LSAT a priority, but be realistic. Take a look at your other obligations and ask yourself how much time you can reasonably devote every day and every week to prepping for the LSAT. If you have a full-time job or you have kids at home, don't tell yourself that you're going to spend 40 hours a week studying. Start with something more manageable and work your way up from there if it's not too difficult and not too much of a burden. Third, don't over-focus on your weakest section. I know I told you that this is where you're going to spend the bulk of your time studying, but it shouldn't be your sole focus. You should still be working on slowly improving or at the very least maintaining your abilities in the other sections. I recommend spending 50 to 60% of your time on your weakest sections, about 20 to 30% of your time on your strongest sections, and the rest of your time split evenly between review and practice tests. Fourth, don't overschedule practice tests. The goal is to take just enough tests that you're comfortable with them and you can see whether or not you're improving. There's not much need to take more than that, and if you're scheduling them every 2 to 3 days, you're going to get burnt out, dread the idea of studying, and stop sticking to your schedule. I think that the sweet spot is 1 practice test per week, max. Ideally, you only do them once every 2 weeks. This gives you time to actually learn and improve between each practice test without losing your feel for how the LSAT works. And the 5th thing to consider with your schedule is don't be afraid to change it. If after the first few weeks you feel like you can add more, then add more. If it feels like it's too much, then cut back on what you initially scheduled. Your initial schedule isn't set in stone. It's meant to be a guide to help you stay consistent. Don't feel bad about changing it if you need to. Once you have a schedule in place, it's time to focus on your study materials. For most of you, there are 3 things that you're going to be using to prep for the LSAT. Practice tests, practice problems/books, and tutoring. All three of these are extremely important to your prep, and all three can be pretty pricey. So you're going to want to make sure you're using what's best for you. Everyone has their own taste when it comes to this stuff, so you should do your own research, but there are a few tips that everybody should listen to when it comes to choosing your prep materials. First, focus on real LSAT questions. There are a few ways to get full LSATs, and these are the holy grail when it comes to practice tests. You aren't going to find something better for prepping for an upcoming LSAT than an actual LSAT itself. On top of that, there are some companies that repurpose old LSAT questions or base their questions on those old LSATs. And these are the types of resources that you should be looking at when deciding what prep materials to use. And one thing you don't want to do is skipping over those expensive options. I know that money is tight and law school prep can be really expensive. But you know what else is expensive? Law school. Spending an extra few $100s on LSAT prep right now could end up saving you thousands on tuition down the line. I know this won't be viable for everybody, but don't count something out just because of the price tag. And do your research and see if it's actually worth the money. Like I said, spending a little bit more right now could save you a ton down the line. But that's enough talking about costly test prep. There are a couple of things that you could do outside of traditional studying to help you get ready for your LSAT. And that's to focus on critical thinking and reading. The LSAT is designed to test your logical reasoning and your ability to process and comprehend information. So the more time that you spend doing that stuff, the better you're going to get at it. An easy way to do this is to spend more time reading. This can be anything, whether it's fantasy, self-help, or the Wall Street Journal. Just pick something up and get in the habit of reading in your downtime. But don't just read it and forget it. Take the time to actually digest the information and make sure that you understand it. If you're reading fiction, ask yourself, does this make sense? Should this character be doing what they're doing? If you're reading the news, ask yourself, what are the long-term ramifications of this? Does this have any economic impacts? Doing this will help you get better at quickly processing information and thinking about it critically. Getting in the habit of reading and thinking through what you just read will make you a lot more efficient when it comes to most portions of the LSAT. Plus, it's a good idea to be in the habit of reading when it comes to law school in general. Now, when you're actually studying and you get a question wrong, don't just breeze over it. Take the time to understand why you actually got it wrong. I know this seems obvious, but we often forget to analyze our own mistakes, especially when we're doing something as intense and stressful as prepping for the LSAT. It's super easy to take a look at the answer sheet, see the correct answer, and go, oh, I got it, even though you don't actually have it, and then just never touch that question again. But that's wrong if you haven't caught on already. You should take the time to stop and actually analyze why you got it wrong. Ask yourself why you chose the answer you did, and pause after you read the correct answer to make sure that you really get why that's the correct answer. To make sure you don't repeat the same mistakes, keep a list of the questions you get wrong and go back and redo them a few weeks later. If you really took the time to understand why you were wrong the first time, then you should get it right on the second try. But if you still get it wrong, that means that you should probably slow yourself down a bit, add it back to the pile, and try it again in a few more weeks. One thing that you should do right at the beginning of your prep is to set your goals. But make sure that your goals are realistic. If you got a 150 on your first practice LSAT, don't set the goal of getting a 173 on an actual LSAT 2 months down the line. Keep your goals realistic and manageable. And don't just set goals for a final score or percentile. Set goals for milestones along the way, like completing 4 practice tests by a certain date, or completing a workbook problem by X time today. Then you're going to want to actively track your goals. Keep a checklist of the things you said you were going to do and track your progress. Doing this helps motivate you and also see where you might need some adjustments. The motivation comes in from checking off the box and seeing how close you're getting to that final goal. It's that little hit of dopamine every time that you check something off on your to-do list. The tracking comes in and the adjustments come in with seeing if you're falling behind or if you're getting way ahead. Just like with your schedule, don't be afraid to change your goals if you were overly ambitious at the start or if you weren't ambitious enough. If you find that you're blowing your goals out of the water, then go ahead and set yourself some higher goals. And if you haven't been able to finish the things that you initially set out to do, don't feel bad about breaking them up into smaller pieces and setting smaller goals, then building back up to those initial goals that you had. Overall, your goals should be SMART: specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. But explaining how to build SMART goals in relation to LSAT prep is a little bit beyond the scope of this video. Let me know in the comments if you want a separate video on the best way to set goals for studying and the LSAT. One thing that's an absolute necessity when prepping for the LSAT is to keep yourself balanced. The LSAT is important, but prepping for it shouldn't be your entire life. Take the time to exercise, get proper sleep, spend time with family and friends, and just do the things that you like to do. I've seen people drive themselves crazy over law school and prepping for the LSAT, and it is not worth it. If you let test prep take over your whole life, you are on the fast track for burnout. Studying is going to feel like a chore, you're going to dread having to do it, and you aren't going to be at your best when you actually sit down to take the test. Prepping for the LSAT should be your priority, but not at the expense of your mental and physical health. At least not too much. I know most of you future lawyers are going to completely ignore this section anyways, but please, for the love of God, drink some water and get at least a little bit of sleep. Please. If you found those tips helpful, don't forget to smash that like button and subscribe to the channel for more insider tips on how to ace your law school journey. Got any questions or tips of your own? Feel free to drop them down in the comments. I would love to hear them. And if you want to know more about law school, check out this video here.